the term that you'll hear evangelical Protestants talk about is, oh, I have a personal relationship with God.
Yeah.
Like, well, what does that
What does that mean? Yeah.
Right?
Hey everyone, welcome back to Rough Cut Faith.
Yep.
The place where we have rough thoughts that are definitely not safe to speak out loud.
Why are we doing this then?
I don't know. We know not many people watch.
That's right, yeah. It's fine. It's basically...
It's okay.
I mean, we're just feeding AI is all we're doing.
That's the goal here.
We're corrupting the system.
Well, if you've been following along, you know that we finished our series of what we called That's Not in the Bible.
Yeah.
But before we finish this season, we like to do a couple of episodes that are more fun, talking about stuff that has influenced us. Last week we talked about music, and during this season has kind of been meaningful to us. Today we're going to talk about books, books that have been meaningful.
Bookie McBookersons.
Also known as that, yes.
That's how I call. That's what I call them.
That's what Scott refers to as books.
Don't you have a Bookie McBookerson shelf? No, I have a bookie.
Yeah.
The bookie list.
It's the bookiest shelf. Yeah. So we actually do try to read regularly, but life sometimes gets in the way.
We go through seasons of reading more and seasons of reading less,
and sometimes there's more nonfiction, and sometimes there's more fiction. And I went for a long time not reading much fiction, and only to read nonfiction because I thought it was helpful.
Yeah.
But then I got really bogged down and wasn't reading anything because I needed to have some fun. So, so I
just stopped reading.
I try to mix it up a little bit.
I doom scroll.
That's it. I read Instagram posts. I read memes. Does that count?
It works. It's totally.
Maybe we should do.
It's the literature of this generation.
We should do an episode on the memes that have influenced us over the last season.
We can't.
No.
No.
All right. So today we're talking about some books. I've got one in mind, and let's start with you've got actual physical books.
I do.
Here, so let's
have
talk
real
about
books,
those.
and I also have like one that's not here.
Okay.
So when you say like, oh, let's give some books that are like interesting. One, I'll just mention this because this is like a newer book. This is the Bible. Oh, what?
Oh, how stereotypical.
Oh, the pastor has a copy of the Bible.
What's the book that's
what are you
influenced
doing?
most?
Right?
Oh, the Bible. Okay.
So I actually picked these up. It's called the Lectio Bible, and the reason I'm just simply mentioning it is I've found this to be really encouraging when I'm reading, and the reason why is if you've ever heard of readers' Bibles, they try to take the text and pull out chapters and verses, and different ones format them differently. And I have like an ESV version of it that like it breaks it down into smaller like books and like themes. But I just if you're finding yourself sitting back and going like, hey, I'd like to I want to approach the Bible in a fresh way. This was, man, I just really like this. They remove the chapters, like the chapter breaks. They remove the verse numbers, and so you'll get like a real subtle like footnote for roughly where you're at in the book at the bottom of the page. But I've really just enjoyed like coming to the scripture where you're just reading it without the addition of the numbers.
I think that's it does shape. Having those breaks shape how we engage with Scripture.
Yeah, it does.
I find it especially in the epistles, because they're just letters. So, like these are letters that Paul wrote. These are a letter that James wrote, a letter that John wrote. And when you start breaking it up in chapters and verses, it takes the flow away. So, and that's what we've found so often in preaching through. We're like, well, this actually fits in chapter 2 here a little bit better than why is it split up here?
And so like for me, like it was just like one of those things that I was like, when we're like, hey, what's been encouraging or influenced us or caused you to think through things lately? I'm like, oh, you know what? This has been a reader's Bible that I've really just appreciated having. They only have it in the NIV at this point, which is it's a solid translation, you know. So, but if you're looking for a new way to try to just re-engage with Scripture and you're thinking through it, that's always an interesting an interesting one. A book that I'll say, has stretched me this season. I just finished it on an audiobook, and I thought I probably should pick this one up because I want to work my way through it again. Is a book called Reading Revelation Responsibly.
Oh yeah.
That looks at how it's.
Do you remember who wrote that one?
I have his name right here. One second. It is by Michael Gorman.
Gorman, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm reading the one by McKnight.
Okay. Revelation for the Rest of Us.
Revelation for the Rest of Us.
Yeah, I read that last year.
And that one always gets mentioned in the same terms, like Revelation for the Rest of Us and Revelation Responsibly. Those are the two that seem to constantly be coming up.
And I really it definitely. So I grew up. I didn't grow up, but I still haven't grown up. But the schools that I went to had a very specific approach to reading Revelation. Very prophetic forethought, like this is very clearly like future. And so I've tried to, as I've continued to develop my convictions, my theological understanding of things, I try to read things that are outside of some of those frameworks that cause me to come back and look at it like with some fresh eyes and reevaluate. Am I thinking through this clearly? What do other people say about this? And this is where I think Revelation for the Rest of Us felt very theatrical in the way that McKnight explains it. And I was like, okay, I can appreciate what you're trying to say. I just have a hard time accepting that framework for it. Whereas reading Revelation Responsibly, very similar in what they're both saying, but the way that he approaches it, I felt was much more. It definitely gave me pause repeatedly to read through it. Because both of those authors are trying to root it contextually in the historical literary styles for what it is. And so if you want to get stretched when you think about what does Revelation do, that's a really good book. I would definitely recommend reading Revelation Responsibly. The book that I was just going to say, the one that probably this year is a reread for me that's been really helpful. It's Willard's book, Hearing God. And I've come to this a couple of times because it just, man, it is a very, it removes some of the mystery and the extremist views of what does it mean to hear God, kind of pulls that out, but it also normalizes what does it mean to exist in a relationship with God, that you can discern his voice in Scripture and in the ways that the Scriptures describe. And man, I just really I appreciate Willard from a philosophical standpoint, from a theological framework, but even in the formational practices of what does it mean to exist on a day-to-day basis, where the term that you'll hear evangelical Protestants talk about is, I have a personal relationship with God. Like, well, what does that mean? Right? Well, it means I read my Bible and I go to church and I give a percentage of my income and I share my faith as best I can, whether that's with a tract or something else, right? But it's very formulaic in the way that it is approached. And I just really appreciated Hearing God, Willard's book. We actually did a series under that same title. But in that, I had read most of the book, but I hadn't read all of the book. And then when we went through the teaching series, I was like, you know what, let me come back and reread this book again. And boy, I tell you what, it was just loaded with really practical and beautiful concepts of, it is a relationship, and God does speak to us. God is active in our lives. And
so what did you notice coming back to it and reading it a second time? That was like, you read it the first time. This book is actually on my list of what I'm going to read this summer. It's here.
It's all washed out. There it is. I'll turn it down to there.
But so you read it one time and it was really impactful for you, but then you read it a second time. did you pick up different things or notice a richer reading of it the second time?
I think probably, I would say the things that stuck out to me, there were additional layers and nuances to it. Um, I think having come back to this book after having spent so much time in Matthew, and having worked through the Sermon on the Mount and thought about the realities of what it means to be pursuing the kingdom, to pursue Christ and his ways as like, okay, this is what it means to follow Jesus. It was just like you come back to this thing of here's the same guy talking about it's not abnormal to say you can discern the leading of the Spirit.
Yeah.
It's not abnormal to say that it's not just reading the Bible. It's reading the Bible. It's reading the Bible in community and discerning what God is doing in the lives of other people that are also seeking God's best. And so I just appreciated that Willard in a way that like I think some people could go, oh no, that sounds crazy, or that sounds charismatic, or that sounds this, or that sounds whatever it is, right? You come back to this book and it was just like, it's not weird. That was like, that was the thing. I was just like, instead it's actually beautiful, and it calls us into that beauty. And so I think the first time in reading it, it was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, that's great. That's good. That's true. And you come back into it this time and it was like, oh, I could think about this for a while now.
Yeah.
Like, because you kind of like, you have that overarching concept. I know where he was going, but it just allowed me to slow it down a little bit. I think some of the things that stood out to me even more this reading was the role of the church in hearing God.
Okay.
And
that communal aspect.
Yeah, that was one of those things that I think, because it is so easy to individualize our faith and to kind of go through life following Jesus like on our own. That it's like, oh, this is it. This is just what we're doing. That we sometimes forget that God intentionally put us into a community, and the way that you see the church operating throughout the New Testament is communal. The way that you see the church discerning what is it that God is doing, where is he leading us, what's he doing for us. There's individuals that at times feel like, I think this is it, but there is the communal affirmation of it, or the communal discernment of this is what we're doing. And so I think in reading that this time, that was one of those sections that I would say stood out to me, probably more in this reading. There's a few Willard books that I would go, I want to reread that, or I want to read that occasionally. Living in Christ's Presence is probably my favorite because it's the shortest. But this is up there for me as one that I think is for people that are wanting to take steps further into an awareness of what God is doing in and around them and through them. That it's like that's a great one.
In engaging with that book, has it changed how you practice or your focus?
I don't know that I would say it like it completely has altered it, but it has reaffirmed that the things I need to prioritize. And so, I don't know that I would say that, I totally do things differently now. But I think if I was to go through the book, I could pick out things that I've highlighted or made note of that I'm like, oh, yeah, I actually do. I do practice this. And so I think that's probably the scatteredness of myself when I think about books. It's more it's not osmosis, but it's more like the subtle ways that I get, kind of picking certain things up. So cool. Those are the 2-3-ish books that I would say, in this season have been really I've appreciated. So, what about you? What are some things going on?
So, I just picked one book to point out.
It's because you can just pick something that's just in it.
Well, it's because the other ones I've read really aren't that helpful. They're literally just really fun to read.
That's okay, Mike.
And this one's very different and weird, so I will have to describe it first of all.
Okay.
It's a book by Terry Pratchett called Small Gods.
Okay.
And it's a fiction. So Terry Pratchett wrote about, I think he wrote like 45 books.
Okay.
Something like that. And they all take place in this fantasy universe called Discworld.
Okay.
Which is a world that is held up by 4 elephants. It's a flat land.
Okay.
It's a disc held up by 4 elephants that ride on the back of a giant turtle through space.
Nice.
Okay,
Sounds fantastic.
It is, yeah, it's quite fantastic. It's just absurd. So he's a British author, and he writes satire, but he uses this fantasy satire world as a commentary on our world, on social constructs, on religious constructs, on political constructs, like everything that he looks at in our world, he just writes about in this world, and it's really pretty fantastic. I read another book by him earlier this year, and it looked at racism between dwarves and ogres and humans, and it was like, it's just this fantastic expose on racism and the stupidity of it, and but the one I'm talking about today is called Small Gods, and I will describe stick with me, because it sounds ridiculous, other than a world on the back of 4 elephants.
I was just going to say, it sounds tiny.
It's a very large elephant. So in this world, there are gods.
Yeah.
And they're all different kinds of gods, and they start out small, but as people believe in them, they grow in power.
Okay.
So it kind of like plays with Greek mythology. There's this one place in the middle of Discworld where the strongest gods reside. Okay. And they're all, pretty dumb. If you're familiar with Greek mythology, all the gods are jealous and petty and always fighting and backbiting each other and stabbing each other in the back and all. So it's kind of like that. But there was this one god that used to be very powerful, and he could manifest in the shape of this giant bull, and that was the statues that everyone was worshiping. And at one point, he tried to manifest as a bull, leaving the center where all the gods just hang out. And he's like, I'm going to go check on my followers, basically. And he manifests as a tortoise because he didn't realize that so few people believed in him anymore.
Oh, wow.
So he manifests as this tortoise and spends years trying to get to the one city where he actually is worshipped.
Yeah.
But as you go through this book, what you realize Pratchett is getting at is how people use religion to control, how people will use worship to control others. So this tortoise god finds one person who believes everything. Yeah. Just believes everything about the religion, everything about this god, the god Om. Yeah. But he's come to this city where the entire city is ruled by this temple. The entire city has the structure of religion all around it, but there's only one believer. And this god Om is trying to get more powerful. He's like, I don't know what's going on here. I'm a tortoise, and I'm supposed to be this giant bull that comes in and just lets everybody know I'm still in charge here. Yeah. And if fewer and fewer people believe in him, or if this one guy stops believing in him, then he loses all power, and he goes into this exiled desert where the small gods go. Oh, okay. So the story, as the story goes, these religious structures, like the fight another town, there's this other city that doesn't believe in the god Om, and it's filled with philosophers, and so there's a lot of poking and fun at philosophy and how like they all argue amongst themselves. But what I found so impactful, and why I think this book is an important one, was it really exposed how people will say they worship. They will declare their worship and their religious fervor, and have no belief whatsoever. Yeah. So they only start believing in the structure of the religion and not the God itself. Yeah. And the structure of the religion is very powerful, and the people who are in charge, the priests who are in charge, rule by fear.
Yeah.
Because and everything they do and everything they say is rhetorically religious, and devout, and they're very pious. But they actually have no belief in the God whatsoever. They are only some of them are holding on to it for power. Some of them are holding on to it for fear. They like having that fear. Some just need the structure.
Yeah.
So without the structure of religion, they would be completely lost. So they don't really believe in the God it's himself.
Yeah.
They believe in the structure of the
Gotcha.
religion. So all of these little tendrils start to play out as you read this book about how the structure is the important thing. And they've taken away books.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to read unless it's a religious book in this city.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to read anything else unless it's a religious book. So all scientific progress is stopped. In this other city filled with philosophers, they have the giant library. Everybody argues about everything, but they're making progress. They're also allowed to argue about things. They're allowed to talk about things. They have scientific progress that eventually takes down the city that has outlawed scientific progress because it wasn't in the religious books. But it really is about power, and it's about maintaining the structure.
That's an interesting thing. As you were describing it, I had this little like momentary synapse. It was like when you described the priests as like, oh, well, they like the structure, but they don't believe in the God. I was like, wait, this sounds like the music album you picked. So I'm starting to go like, wait, is there a theme here, Mike, where you're just sitting around and like, well, all right. So if you missed that podcast, you'll want to go back because Mike has a theme.
So we'll see what movie I choose next.
Right, I can't wait. Well, that's an interesting thing because, and I think what you get at is that is the reality that even fiction tells a story. Even fiction tells a worldview, and it's something that you can observe and glean from and be like, wow, that's there's something else going on there.
Yeah, well, that's one good fiction writers that intend to do it this way tell the truth.
Yeah.
It may not be a true story, but what they're talking about is true.
Yeah.
It's a true humanity.
Yeah.
And so what I like about, that's what I'm drawn to in these books is they're completely fantastic. Like it takes place in this fantasy world with everything's made up. And you could look at it and be like, well, that's sacrilegious. They're talking about other gods. But it's intentional. It's satire. It's supposed to be ridiculous. But it's pointing a finger at this is what happens in the real world.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, Pilgrim's Progress did that. C.S. Lewis did that. Tolkien did that.
There's a rich history of books that say this is true, whether or not it's real.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. So, and what was the author's name?
Terry Pratchett.
Terry Pratchett, right?
Yeah, he's fairly well known in that circle. Like, people who read Pratchett tend to read all of them.
Okay.
I've probably read 8 or 10 of his books over the years.
Yeah.
But it really reminded me of the Sadducees.
Okay.
Like in Jesus's day, the Pharisees really believed.
Yeah.
They believed in their piety.
Yeah.
But the Sadducees were kind of like, there's no resurrection. We're more lawyers. We're more the people that take care of the money. We take care of the temple.
Yeah.
We're the ones that make sure everybody's
Maintain
paid
the structure.
up. They maintained the structure.
Yeah.
And they had power because of the structure. They didn't really ascribe to like the Pharisees and the Sadducees were often at odds with each other because the Sadducees really weren't all about the religious part. They were about the structure of it and maintaining it.
Yeah.
And they were more the wealthy and powerful ones because of that.
Yeah.
And I think of today's world, you know, that's as I'm reading through this, I'm just thinking so much about how much lip service gets paid to religion, to faith, to Christianity in the halls of power, where it's really about the structure of power that maintains that. It's not about God. It's not about faith.
Yeah, that was, I mean, that goes back to, there was a book, I'll mess up his name, Verdun, but it was a book called The Reformers and Their Stepchildren. And it's dealing specifically with the Reformation. And what he's addressing is that, you know, through the Reformation, it wasn't necessarily like the across the board. It wasn't necessarily like a spiritual thing in nature. It became the shifting of power. And so it was exchanging, the power of Rome for the power of the German princes. And so it was like, okay, well, who's going to be the one that's going to guard and protect now? Where's the power? And so historically, that has been something that, plays out in the real world and speaks right to what you're saying, that good fiction tells the truth. Yeah, it's rooted in reality, because if you can't identify with the character in any way, or if you can't see life in a character, then there's pretty much not going to be any draw to stay there.
Right, you're not going to connect with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it did reinforce for me this question of who's using religion. Like, you must be discerning in life, especially as a follower of Christ, as someone who lives by faith. You have to discern.
Sure.
Is religion being used to control me?
Sure.
Or does this person actually ascribe to the faith that I ascribe to? Does their life actually embody the faith that they are talking about? And that's, again, where this book went, was there's this one guy that actually believed. There's this one guy who sought to live as he believed. And he started to, like, at one point, he was just, I'm within the structure and believe everything. Everyone has pure motives. He's a very naive young priest. And throughout the story, he starts to recognize the evil that's actually being perpetrated in the name of this God. Because it's not even, they didn't even believe it. But one of the most touching moments in the book was the highest priest, who was really modeled after the Inquisition. Like, he would torture and call it, they came to faith at the end. He was dying, and this priest, the young priest, carried him through the desert, and he could have left him there to die. But he determined that if he believed something, then it didn't matter it didn't matter the circumstances. It didn't matter that this guy deserved death, that he hurt hundreds of people. It didn't matter that this was the way he was. If he believed it was true, if the young priest believed it was true, then he was going to live according to those standards, regardless of who else believed. And it was so moving and heartfelt to see this type of story being told.
That drama playing out.
As, okay, so the ones who believe for real, you're going to see the fruit. You're going to see it play out in their lives. The ones who pay lip service to the structure, who will live and die by the structure of religion, who use the power of religion to rule over people, they're the ones that are going to, eventually, you'll be able to discern. Because the fruit of their lives will be damage. It'll be hurt. It'll be pain that's caused, or it'll just be like, obviously, they're just in it for the power. But as a follower of Christ, we have to be aware of that and learn to discern those things.
That's good stuff.
So those were all good books. I think that we could recommend.
I think so.
All right,
so sweet.
If you like fantasy satire that explores religion and
or the
social
Bible.
Problems, or the Bible, then take a look at those. And if you have any questions for us, or
if you've read something, that was really good.
If you'd like, if you would recommend a book to us, to read, we'd love to engage with that. You can leave a comment on the YouTube channel, or you can go to discoverthegrove.com, fill out a contact form there, and we'll be able to interact that way. Until next week, we will keep reading.
See ya. Bye.